Okay, I'm gonna really piss some people off with this review. So, The Last Days of Disco. Considering that I basically have a fetish for dialogue-driven movies, I thought this would be just right up my alley. And I don't really know much about Whit Stillman. All I know is that he's supposedly the only director in the world who gets a great performance out of Kate Beckinsale. I'm not saying that Kate Beckinsale's bad, it's just that she really needs a really good director to get a great performance out of her. She's kind of like Adam Sandler in a way. So I decided to get into his filmography with his most famous one, which is The Last Days of Disco. And at first, I thought it was about destroying the cliche image of the disco era, which the film kind of does, when I'm talking about the cliche image of the disco era, I'm mostly talking about the image that we now have about the disco era through Saturday Night Fever, the soundtrack, the Bee Gees, and Donna Summers, and all that stuff. And, because in this film, it contrasts the disco scene and the disco clubs with the very modern-looking job outfits. The conversations go beyond, just dancing and having a good time. They talk about human nature. They talk about relationships. They go way deeper than the actual subject matters of the music and the mood of the scene in general. And the film focuses less on the music, although the music definitely takes up a huge presence in the film, and it's more about the opportunity that the clubs give you socially. So maybe because of that, it's trying to show you that people just don't go to dance. People go there to converse, to actually talk about intellectual things. And suddenly, this really silly image of John Travolta dancing in the middle of the club kind of starts to go away, and this film is trying to represent that era with people with martinis sitting on the couch talking about how pretentious martinis are. And it's not meta like that, but it's clever to a certain. But it becomes a problem. I'm going to touch on that just a bit later. But the more I watched the film, I realized the film is more about the modern day sexual dynamic, and definitely more so about the modern intellectual and modern intellectualism in general. How people overthink and categorize each other, trying to look smart because they seem like they know about human nature. They seem like they know about people. They seem like they look through people. They seem like they look through the bullshit, while in fact they're actually more shallow than most of the people in the world. And, they describe each other with such nonsense words like, they say, that guy has an ethereal side. What does that even mean? They describe each other with such untangible descriptions that it just ends up being pretentious. And that's exactly the point. The film is trying to show them in a pretentious light, at least some of the characters. And it's funny how the two main characters, played by Chloë Sevigny and Kate Beckinsale, who are great, who are really good in this movie, the two characters are publishers. They work as publishers. And when the film describes publishers, or at least portrays publishers, as people who read the very potent description of the summaries, but only hear about the whole book through other people. But yet they sell it like it's their book. So, again, it's about how shallow modern intellectualism could be. They're so focused on analyzing the surface that they don't even bother going into the middle, to the core. And, a lot of the multiple so-called intellectual conversations in the movie really go nowhere. And in a way, that's the point. The point is to show that the surface of the conversations prove a point. It's making a point about how these relationships are very screwed up, and these multiple characters come together to show their personalities through these conversations. But the actual plot doesn't really have to do too much about the conversations. The conversations might have something to do with the plot or the relationships if it's about the relationships, but when they're talking about, I don't know, like the sexual dynamics in The Lady and the Tramp, that's when the film kind of derails for a moment. And later on, they kind of mention it once. And I feel like this is both effective and it's also a huge negative for the movie. And I like that at the end, everyone who went too deep into, the intellectual side of the character dynamic, they all lose their jobs at the end, alongside the death of disco, because, that there was that one time, that one moment in history where people finally realized, oh shit, disco kinda sucks, and they start burning the records. And alongside the death of disco, these people whose youth was represented through that scene lose their job. They kind of come down from their semi-prime, at least they had a job at first. And it shows you how a scene can really represent youth. A scene can represent you in general. And when it's destroyed, a part of you is also dead. And ironically, I find it really ironic that that these shallow intellectual youth is represented by the most vapid genre in the history of music. Like, you could argue that. Like, even trap rap that's coming out. I know a lot of people complain about trap rap, but at least people like 21 Savage is actually talking about his life. Like that, when he raps about the street and, killing, the gun violence and whatnot, that was part of his past. He's actually talking about some real stuff. When you listen to some of the biggest disco songs in the world, and I'm saying some of the biggest disco songs, some of the disco songs in the past are really good, but most of the disco songs of the past were really just vapid dance songs about dancing. It was dance songs about dancing. It's not clever in the meta way, it's just stupid. And I like how these character dynamics are really well represented character-wise. Kate Beckinsale's character is everything that the film is trying to make fun of. She's the modern intellectual, but she's the epitome of being the shallow modern intellectual. And she's clearly smart. I'm not saying that she's dumb, and I'm not saying that modern intellectualism, like pretentious modern intellectualism, is dumb. But when you get way up your ass, and when you start just living in your own bubble, and when you start thinking that you have the answer, and that you're special, that's when we start having a problem. And Kate Beckinsale's character goes way too deep into that rabbit hole. And Chloë Sevigny's character is the person who finds personal redemption and adjusts to the outside world by breaking away from that pretentious modern intellectualism. She's also clearly a very smart character, but she doesn't try to show it off. And thankfully, at first she seems to really care about all those conversations and what they're about and how she fits into that mold, but in the end, she comes out being a much more genuine person, which might be exactly what the film is trying to tell us. Maybe we should be more genuine instead of analyzing fucking everything. Which is ironic, which is kind of, hypocritical for me because I'm analyzing this movie, but whatever. I'll think about that later. That's my personal problem. And I like that the fact that at the end, the film is not cynical and hopeless towards the overly pretentious intellectual people. Because in the end, they actually all kind of mature, which makes the Lady and the Tramp conversation really more potent, because they were talking about how the tramp changes, the tramp matures. It's not about finding the bad guy, it's about finding a person and maturing together. And in a way, that's what these characters do. They converse, they realize some things about life, and they mature. And they find more tangible meaning in life and in their conversations. And they start having much more genuine conversations at the end. even though they still think they're like the smartest people in the world. But you can't help that. And in a way, the film is trying to say they're the tramps. And I don't know, it's got this really poetic flow about it. You know, the way the characters mature and the way they converse and the way they're portrayed. There's something very... I can't find the right word for it, but it's really well done. When it comes to character development and character building, this film gets an A+. But there's a huge problem with this movie, and maybe it's just me, but I feel like the dialogue focuses way too much on its social commentary aspect than its character building aspect. At times, it does build character, but there are moments where the dialogue goes on forever and ever and ever, and at a certain point, you realize the conversation already made its point. You're not dumb. You understand what the film is trying to say. So, at a certain point, the conversation just derails and becomes this faux pas social commentary that doesn't really... That really isn't important to the film or the characters at all, or the audience for that matter. And also, and this is really the main problem, the side stories and the side plots of this movie are absolutely uninteresting. There's like a drug raid. There's like some relationship well, the relationship problems are actually kind of interesting, but there's this thing with drug raids at the club, and there's some like really sneaky shit going on at the club, and like at the end they kind of push, they just ham-fist it all in at the end, and you're just like, dude, come on, we don't need this. This isn't important at all. And I don't know. I feel like the film is doing a really good job at one thing, but it's not putting all of its focus on it. I feel like they should really focus on what the conversations are trying to represent and what the characters represent. Not really derail with side stories and overlong conversations about pretentious stuff. But still, I do think the film is trying to make a good point. I feel like it does succeed in making that point. It's just that it has some extra meat on it that's honestly just not necessary. It's more fat than meat. But still, I think it's a good movie. I'm not sure if it's great. I'm not sure if it's a masterpiece. I'm not sure if it really deserves its cult classic status, but still, it's good. I'll end it there before people start crucifying me in the comment section. Yeah, The Last Days of Disco. It's good. Kate Beckinsale's hair looks really cool. I wish I had hair like that, or at least hair that made me look cool as much as Kate Beckinsale in this movie. God damn it. Bye.